Welcome to the Take a Mulligan podcast with your hosts, Brian and Kenny Mulligan. We hope to encourage you not to quit and keep going. If you're at that place where you just want to stop and give up, don't. Second chances can happen. Try again and take a mulligan. Hey, welcome back to Take a Mulligan podcast. We're so glad you're with us here, and we're so excited to have our two older brothers, or not older brothers, but older than me anyway, Barry and Sean on with us today. So welcome back, bros. Nice to have us all together again.
It's good to be back. Thanks.
Yeah, good to be on here.
Yeah, it's fun to have all four of us again. Just so cool.
Yeah. So today we thought we would talk about fathers from a son's perspective, and we were looking at it from our own dad and the lives we had with him as four sons of his. So all of us on here are here to talk about a perception of what we have and what we had and what we experienced growing up with our dad. Our relationship with the dad is a powerful one in our lives. Good or bad, it has an impact. So we want to share a little bit, talk a little bit about what our relationship was like with our dad and just share with you what he meant to us. What we thought would be interesting is that we span about 13 years. So we all have a very different perspective on our dad and different time frames with him and how we grew up. And so we hope it will challenge you as you're listening, and we hope to all encourage you as well.
Yeah, that sort of boggles my mind. There's 13 years difference between us because like dad's parenting early on was probably so different than it was midstream and then even later on in life, right? So I thought it'd be neat to just have a share. Like, what do you guys like? What's your earliest memories of dad?
Mine, honestly, it's weird because I probably was like 2 or 3, but I remember very distinctly that my mom and dad never slept in. But every once in a while, I don't know, it was maybe Saturday morning or something, dad would sleep in. I remember sliding down his legs in their bed.
Oh, yeah.
Like his legs were a slide. And I remember, because I remember the feel of the blanket. It had these little balls on it or something like that, whatever it was. I don't know. But I can remember that to this day. And I remember doing that. And I said, I mean, how old are you when you're sliding down your parents' legs? 2, 3 at most. So that's my earliest memory. And I remember somebody else being there, probably Brian, because he would have been about my age.
I kind of vaguely remember that a little bit, yeah.
And maybe Denise was there. I don't know. But I do remember that. And it was, a random Saturday morning. Who knows how often that happened. But I do remember that.
See, I have that memory too. Do you, Barry?
Not of that. I mean, I remember the slide thing. He used to sing a song and bounce us on the knee and then kind of let you slide down there too. I can't remember. It probably was pony. It was a pony thing. Something about
yeah. Pony Boy.
Pony Boy. Yeah. That's it. He had a lot of songs that he sang in general, but yeah, for that one, he did that with all other ones. All of us. I don't remember myself, but I remember with most of you guys.
But you don't remember like the bedroom thing going in and.
I remember like waking them up in the morning or something, or jumping in the middle of the bed every once in a while on a Saturday morning.
Okay.
Yeah,
but the slide part, I don't remember that for me.
So what's some of your other earliest memories?
I think for me, I remember, like you said, the songs. There was always, we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything, car rides. We did a lot of car rides. And we all piled into our station wagon. And I just remember always, every time we went anywhere, whether it was, visiting our grandparents that were an hour away, his parents, his family were usually an hour away. So we usually had an hour car ride. And I always remember him singing songs or leading songs, whoever was in the car. And I don't even remember at that point. I assume maybe all of us were there except for maybe Patty when we went on trips like that when I was really young. And, just always he was always singing songs in the car. I mean, that's probably the earliest memory I have, because it definitely wasn't mom leading those songs, I don't think.
No, yeah, I don't even know if could mom sing. I don't remember.
Yeah, she did sing anyway.
She could. I remember hearing her sing like in church.
Okay.
She was quiet. She didn't have any confidence, but I do remember her singing. Or even Happy Birthday, I remember her singing.
Wow.
I guess my earliest memory was probably the World's Fair. Was that
up in Canada?
No, New York.
Okay.
New York. I want to say it was 64, maybe 65. I just heard the date recently on some completely random things. Like, oh, well, what do you know? That's the one I was at, because they mentioned the ride that they introduced at that World's Fair, which was it it's a small world after all. And I remember going on that ride. But what I remember a bit, and then was reinforced by a photo of me. There was some kind of fountain, and Dad being Dad, I, from what I can recall, he's put me in front of the fountain, said, "Stay here. I'm going to step over there and take a picture." Well, there's people walking everywhere, so for a 3-year-old, this is like, you're not gonna leave me. I don't care if you're taking 10 paces away. You're not gonna leave me. And in the photo, I have that
Like,
kind of. I'll have to dig it up at some point and show it to you. But I do
oh man,
remember that happening. And then the photo was like, oh yeah, it's a little bit more clear to me. And then I remember it's a small world after all. We went through this ride. It was one of those kind of things where you sit in a little boat and you go on those little rivers and it's all pretty paced, and then little things show up. It's kind of like a Disney thing. And they were singing "It's a Small World After All," and they do it at Disney World now too, I think.
yeah,
Wow.
it's cool, right? That's fun. Yours is World's Fair too, because I remember one of my earliest memories was with Dad and Mom at the World's Fair.
And now, was that Expo 70?
That was the Expo 70 up in Canada. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I remember there was this big sliding board. It was like a dragon looking thing. It was all closed tunnel.
Yeah.
And I came down it. So what was I, like 5'6", maybe, came down that slide and I found a $5 bill at the bottom.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and I remember
70s,
showing
that's
Dad,
like-
That was big bucks.
that was, and Dad is like, I don't know. He's like, I think he bought ice cream for everybody or something like that. I still don't know how I lucked out in that deal. Like everybody got ice cream. I found $5. but yeah, I remember that specifically. That was a cool event being at the World's Fair. Man, it's a shame like those things ended because that was a cool thing.
Well, that was one of the first years they changed the name from World's Fair to Expo. I don't know why, and I don't know if it was the second year or the third year they had it, and I don't know how often the World's Fair happened anyway before that. It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, that's wild. So I mean, we'll probably get into this a little later, but so Dad, our dad was an artist, and he was an art teacher for, oh my goodness, how many years was he teaching art?
Over
He
30.
was 37 at Ewing High.
I thought it was
37 years at that one high
37
school.
years, and then he went to Notre Dame with me as a freshman. That was really exciting. Your dad going to high school as a
That
freshman.
was weird.
Because then he taught 2 years there, and then they let him go. And then
Poor
he
tenure.
did. I was just talking to somebody today about this. And then I thought he did just some subbing for at least a couple of years, and then ended up at Hun. And I
Okay.
think it was either one. It was at least one. It might have been 2 years at Hun, and then he finally stopped. So let's see. So that probably takes us into like maybe 95, 96, 97 ish, and
Yeah,
then I
that
think he
sounds
finally gave it a rest.
Wow. So how does the dad, like some of his memories of growing up with you, each of you, like play into the whole art world?
Summer theater.
Some of the
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was a big deal, and I didn't go as much as you guys did.
Mm.
You, Barry and Kenny, you went a lot. Even Brian went more than
I
did.
went a ton. Yeah.
Wasn't it? But I mean, the sets and the backdrops, the paint, all that stuff. I remember the smells. I can still remember. The late nights. Coming home sometimes with pizza or
Yeah.
Chinese or something late at night.
Hoagies,
Never
Al
did.
John's hoagies.
Yeah,
with the onions all over the place. 11 o'clock at night they're eating. So let's just paint a little picture for everybody listening. So
Good
our
idea.
dad, so at the high school in our town, at Ewing High School, they did a summer theater program, which sounds like it was probably a really cool thing because it gave the kids something to do in the summer. So they started in what, like end of July, probably with rehearsals and
somewhere
everything.
mid-July,
Later
maybe.
than that.
Yeah,
'Cause it
and
was
then the
early. They
production.
launched in September, right?
Yeah.
They
So
I thought
it was
the
Labor Day
week before
weekend.
School started, right? Or right when school was
Yeah.
starting.
Yeah, school
production
started
happened?
with that production.
With the
yeah.
production. Okay, yeah. So basically for that month and a half or so of the summer, the kids would go over during the day, and if you were on the crew, you're working on the crew. If you were in the play, you're working on the play or whatever. So us as kids would go over with our dad, who was over there pretty much. I mean, I remember I was probably like, I don't know, maybe 9, 10, 11, 12-ish, maybe even 8-ish when I started going over. And I remember going over with him sometimes in the morning at like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I think sometimes he would come home for lunch, and then sometimes I would stay home, and then he would go back. Other times I went back with him. Sometimes we'd come home for dinner. Other times he just stayed there. And then most nights he came home at like 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was working on sets the entire day, and whoever else was crew, we were either painting or trying to paint, trying to stay in the lines for him, trying to put the sets together with those corrugated nails that who uses those anymore to put the corners together for the drops and everything and the
Oh,
flats. Yeah, so I mean that's I remember that too. I mean that was big time, and here I was like 8, 9, or 10 hanging out with these high school kids, so I thought it was kind of cool. And yeah, that's what I remember. Those late nights, and they'd come home, and I'm like, mom and dad were like, they were a unique parent compared to today. Like today, it's like, oh, what do you guys want? Let's get it for you, or well, we want a snack, but I guess we'll get it for everybody. They were like, no, this is our hoagie at 11 o'clock at night. That's not for you guys.
oh, no. So
That's
I
kind of
remember
the
getting
attitude it
pizza late
was. Yeah,
at night.
yeah. That sometimes they got that too, but I remember that hoagie.
Wow. Yeah, I remember going over summer theater too. I remember as early as I think I was 4 years old, maybe 5, because it was the set of Sound of Music,
Mm.
and it was the grand staircase, and this is before all the water based paints came out. And I remember Dad giving me a paintbrush and saying, "Well, you can paint the steps." And I remember painting the steps, and I painted them white, and I had fun, and I'm sure yeah, there was probably paint all over, but I remember trying to get the paint off my hands and use turpentine.
Hmm.
And I didn't wash my hands too well after that. And oh my goodness, the burning sensation for hours. Like it was probably like 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Boy, I was like, oh man. So yeah, it's like my earliest memory of summer theater.
Did
Wow.
you get cleaned up there, or do you remember coming home to be cleaned up with that?
No, that was there. I remember using it there, and then yeah.
Okay, because I remember that conversation with mom and dad, and I think I had some on me too, in the basement in dad's workshop. And mom was not happy that this happened to both of us, but primarily you. I don't
Okay.
remember the burns, but I remember her
Well,
asking
no,
him about the fact that there was no water-based paint and that the turpentine would have been fine, but without washing that off again. Yeah, I can tell you where I was standing in the basement when I remember that part of the conversation.
yeah.
That's why I was curious if the conversation happened back at home once you were burning hours
No,
later, or if it
I
all happened
remember.
at home.
I remember walking up and down to high school, like around whether it was the set or the auditorium or something like that. I just remember trying to walk this thing off because the wind felt good. Again, they were burned, but the skin obviously was irritated enough where it felt like they were burning, kind of thing. But yeah, I just remember that. Wow.
Well,
Yeah,
he was so particular too. Like you couldn't just wash off a paintbrush. Like
oh no.
you had to get every single bristle with not 1 ounce of color on it, and the rollers. And I mean, it was hard to wash that stuff off because it wasn't coming off easy. And like you said before, the latex paint, that's all you could use, and the
Yep.
turpentine, and the little yellow mustard container that he would always
Yeah.
squirt out and use it. And I just remember, he was such a perfectionist, so that was like probably my first kind of maybe introduction to understanding that was when I helped out there, because I was like, wow, this is like a lot of work that he's so meticulous with exactly how to clean this. Like stuff at home I had recognized, but I think that's where it really hit me, was watching him there and how meticulous he was. And I think it
Yeah.
was cool too, because I remember every play he would go to the library to pull out books. He'd get all the books about the architecture and the time periods, and he put them all up on the overhead projector on the basement wall and have this huge picture to then I guess put down on the flats. I still don't know how he took a picture that might have been 4 feet wide or something onto a flat that was 8 by 8. I don't know how
He would project it. He had a little drawing, like eight
oh
and a
he
half,
did.
11.
Okay.
He'll
And then he
project
even
out.
set it up in the middle of the auditorium on those wooden seats.
Oh, that's
Turn
right.
off the
That's
lights in
right.
the auditorium and hang the 30-foot by 60-foot, I think that's how big it was,
30 by 60.
canvas.
Yeah.
And then we would be on ladders, step stools, and on the ground, and all of us would have pencils. And we'd
Oh,
be
see, I
up
don't think
all
I ever
over
did that part.
tracing that part. The problem was that at 60-foot projection, the line on the paper, which is what, a Sharpie, is actually now about 3/4 of an inch wide. So you have to decide, am I going on the inside or the outside, down the middle
Yeah.
of the line? And I remember asking that, Dad, which one am I going to do here as it intersects the roof line? How are we supposed to do? So yeah, and I've used that technique ever since, to this very day, actually.
Yeah. Still work. Now you guys might not remember, but in the early days, Dad would literally make a 3-dimensional set of each of the scene changes and everything. He would make
Yeah, I
little
don't think I remember
cardboard
that.
models, and you'd like, I mean, you're talking like, 4 or 5 inches tall, but he would have the whole set, and he would turn them. So he'd paint on one side with some watercolor paints, and then you'd spin it, and he'd have the other side with the next scene change and everything.
Wow.
It was wild.
Quarter-inch scale, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, Dad was definitely a perfectionist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I learned that about him. I think I don't know, 5, and I made him a handmade birthday card, and he critiqued it.
Oh,
You
no.
kind of missed over here. And I'm like, I was crushed. I remember being crushed because here I'm thinking, I made Dad a birthday card, and here he's telling me how I did it wrong. That was bizarre, but that's when I first was like, wow, he's really got high standards.
Yep. I remember that later years when I used to hand in my, I'd work on my paper that was due the next day.
Yeah.
And, I spent hours on this thing, man. And I think it's really, really good. And I give it to Dad like at 10 o'clock at night. Could you just proofread this to make sure, back then we didn't have computers. So like if you made a mistake, you're handwriting this thing all over again. Right. And Dad at 10 o'clock at night would take the red pen and just like be all over it. And I'm in tears. And I'm probably like a sophomore in high school, but I'm still in tears. And he just like I got to start this whole thing over, and I don't know where to start. And yeah,
it was crushing when he did that. I mean, he was a tough proofreader. You would have thought he was an English teacher, not an art teacher. I mean, he was tough on that. I remember that too. I almost hated to bring him a paper to proofread. And I think he usually would ask too. If he knew we were doing a paper, I think he usually asked me anyway. I think I remember at some point that he would say, all right, make sure you let me see your paper so I could read it over. And after a while, I think it just was natural to say, hey, Dad, can you read this? But it was interesting too when you asked about like, the perspective of the art stuff, because I think I'm the only one that had him as a teacher, right? Because you guys didn't. So I had him. So, right? Or did you have him summer school?
No, we had him at summer school. We were allowed to go to a summer school program.
Oh yeah.
So he taught art for summer school kids that had didn't pass, so to go to summer school. So yeah, no, we did all kinds of art projects in the summer that were like really high caliber.
At Fisher, yeah, I remember doing like tie-dye shirts and pottery and stuff. Yeah, but I had him freshman and sophomore year in high school.
Wow.
So that was like, So again, I'm coming into high school trying to make my own way, and out of a small little grammar school, and coming in with my dad, and I'm like in his class, and then it was like, all right, so what do I do with this? Do I say Dad? Do I not say his name? Do I let people know that he's my dad? I really didn't know what to do for a while. And I never even said anything. I never called him anything. If I had questions, I'd just go up to him, or, I never said his name. And it took a while. I started to get friendly with one of the guys in there, and then he put it together. And then I think it was about 4 or 5 months before the rest of the class started figuring out. And they're like, wait, that's your dad? So freshman year, after they realized that, it was kind of all cool. I mean, I was never overly talented. And again, he was pretty hard critiquing in that too. But then by art 2, the second year, now they all thought, oh, sure, you're getting that grade because your dad's a teacher. So it really flipped on me quickly.
Wow.
I kind of had enough of that after the second year, so I didn't take any more art after that anyway. But that was
the second year.
Well, like I said, it kind of was okay that first year. Everybody kind of knew it and laughed about it, and it was kind of all okay. But the second year was very different because they all like seemed mad at him at that point. And I mean, if you remember, he was a very, very difficult grader for art. Something we would all take for granted. I think, come on, Dad, it's art. How long does it take you to do this, right? I think I realized in later years how awesome he was at his job, though. Yeah. Because how many times were we out, right? Any of us would be out anywhere. Oh, you're Larry Mulligan's son. And oh, I had him. And oh, my son had him. And, I mean, he taught generations. So you saw at least probably 3 generations almost that he taught, at least 2. And I think when, everybody always raved about him. And from our perspective, we saw him grading papers till like, 11 o'clock at night after doing it all day after school. And thinking like, how in the what do you need to grade? Like, how much do you need to see? And I think what I realized from that was, one is he's really good at what he does, and he wants his students to be the best they can be. And I think that's what I recognized, that's why he's so hard on them, because he really is meticulous on seeing details, probably to a fault, but I think it also was for them to recognize they could be better. And it took me a while to actually recognize that. I don't even know how old I was when I recognized that.
So why did you take the art classes in the first place out of the choices of electives?
Well, I was kind of somewhat interested because I was never very naturally artistic. I Google or goof off a little bit here and there, but not much. And that was, it was offered, and I think it was band half the year, art half the year, and it was like one of those electives. You didn't have many as a freshman, so I kind of
Okay.
got stuck in it. And I
Okay.
thought, all right, I guess I'll take art. And I'm like, it'll be weird with that, but
Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of art options, but they wanted you to take some kind of art. So it was either
yeah,
music or, whatever. And
yeah.
I wasn't musically inclined, so I didn't take music. I took art too.
I guess I took
Mhm.
music. I don't even remember that as an elective, but I definitely didn't take art. I had no interest in
No,
taking art.
No, I never did either.
I did my first 2 years, but then when Dad came over as a teacher, I didn't take any more art classes.
That's right. So you were there still too when Dad was a teacher.
yeah.
Yeah, he came over. I was a junior, I
Nine,
think.
Yeah.
yeah, so it was
Yeah,
80, 88,
Okay.
89, 80, 90, 90
88,
year right there.
80, 88,
88,
and
yeah.
89, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, because we both, yeah, we would ride with him in the car. He would
Hmm.
drive in, and we'd go with him, which got us out of the bus, which was nice. But
Yeah.
yeah, I had experiences like you, Brian. Like there were people that did not like Dad as a teacher
Hmm. Yeah.
because he was tough on them, and I
Yeah.
think really good artistic people liked him because they appreciated them,
Hmm.
him kind of honing in their skills. But other people would just took art for fun. They're like, this is too much for me. So I
Yeah.
remember hearing people complain about him, which wasn't easy in high school.
Hmm.
Talking about your dad, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I knew he was tough, so it's kind of like, I get it, but I kind of just stayed out of those conversations.
Yeah.
Now, in the art class, this is interesting to me because I wasn't aware of. I mean, I was off of college by that point too, so
Yeah.
I wasn't even paying attention. But sorry about that. In the classroom, I get in the classroom, but would you consider him tough? And you said tough in grading. I don't ever remember giving him a paper to read. So it's
No?
interesting. That was like your standard fare,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah. I
No.
felt like it was. I mean, I don't, maybe it didn't start till like junior high age. I mean, that's probably when you're doing
Okay.
more papers anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what age it was, but I feel like even as a young kid, like probably like second, third grade, when I had any kind of paper at all or book report or
Yeah.
anything, I always remember he would look at it. And I don't remember whether I had mom check it first. I think she checked some, but I feel like it always went to dad. So I don't know if she defaulted on the dad too. But yeah, the red pen always came out and it was
Oh,
all
yeah.
marked up everywhere.
I don't
I'm
You
like,
remember
don't
that.
Dad,
remember
I'm a second grader. I don't need to know that much about this.
Okay, so
Wow.
my question was, okay, in the artwork, obviously academics, art and
Yeah.
grammar and
Uh,
writing papers, but do you feel that he was tough outside of that environment too as a dad?
oh, okay. Well, again, he was a perfectionist, so it was easy for him to be critical. And I think that was natural for him. I don't think he never meant to hurt feelings by being critical. He
No.
wasn't like that at all. He was a very mild mannered, very loving guy.
Yeah.
But I think it was just his way, I guess, of that's how he was. So he was kind of expecting a lot from other people. So I think I always felt like he expected a lot from me. And I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but it was like you had high expectations. And I think what's interesting is we can dive in this for a few minutes, I guess, is, the discipline growing up. Like, it's weird. Like, people have asked me, over the years, like, what were your parents like? Were they rough? Were they strict? All this kind of stuff. It was so bizarre with them. And I wish we all had this mentality as parents today. And I wish I did when I became a parent. I think I said this as soon as I had Zach. I was like, I wish I could have this magic that dad had. He just had like, he kind of commanded respect in a lot of ways. That it was almost like all he had to do was look at you. And as soon as you had that look of disappointment, I didn't need anything. Please, I'd rather you hit me with the belt than give me that look like that.
Yeah.
Because that look was just disappointment. And sometimes he would say it, right, Sean? I think you remember
Oh
that too. Like,
yeah,
I'm so
yeah,
disappointed. I'm so disappointed. And that just like cut to your heart that you
yeah.
didn't want to disappoint him. So
Yeah.
that was like the discipline. Like, I don't think they needed anything else. I mean, we were, fairly good kids, but I mean, we did our share of stupid stuff, but
Yeah.
I didn't want that look. I never wanted that look. So again, I guess that was part of his critical way of critiquing my behavior then.
Yeah, I have the same type of memory. that was the last thing I wanted to hear Dad say was, "I'm disappointed," or "We're
Yeah.
disappointed in you," and that was that. You're right. It was worse, and not only that, but he'd give you the lecture, about why you should have done it or why you should have done better. And it's like the whole time, like I'm thinking, just give me a smack and let us be done with it, because that would have been easier than the lecture. But that was the way he disciplined, was he let what you did and made it a learning experience, I guess. But I probably blocked out most of what he said just because it was so traumatic. But you're right. He had high standards, and I think that hit me early too. Like he had that magical presence. Like just don't upset Dad. And not that he wasn't like I was never afraid of him.
Mm-mm.
Like in a physical sense, or even him yelling, because he didn't really lose his temper much. Mom did, but Dad didn't really. And it's just like you said, he just had that commanding. I think that authority. It was just he had authority, and I always knew that. And that's I don't know. Maybe because by the time I came along, he was able to establish that authority pretty well with everybody else. But yeah, I always respected him for that, or feared him at sometimes in a sense. But yeah, it was always respect. He's my dad.
So I'm curious what you guys think, because he might have been a lot different with you guys. Like I would think by the time I came around, being the sixth one, they were kind of lax with things. I'm sure you agree with that, Sean.
They were lax with you.
But I'm curious, like for you, Barry, like being one of the oldest, like was he strict to you? Was he did he get angry? Was he kind of calm still then?
I would agree with everything you've already said. There was he commanded a respect, and that was pretty standard, as much as I remember. The high standards, I remember that too, but I also remember him working with me on specific projects for school, grammar school primarily, rather than high school, and him wanting it to be the best and all. But I remember that being more fun than here's the standard. Although there was no question the standards were there, yeah. And the whole summer theater thing, I started with him, I think, on a regular basis around 10 years old. And I went there several summers doing the same kind of thing, and that's where I learned how to draw straight lines and paint straight lines and things like that, follow the contours and whatnot. And I appreciate that very, very much. But I do remember a couple of projects where I don't remember the discipline piece, but I do remember two discipline items that were both in kindergarten, because I walked up to the school. And so what are you, you're 6 years old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you start
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah, so summer after my 5th birthday, I'm in now school, and one was in the fall, one was in the spring, and I was getting, I don't know, something was happening. I think maybe it was Carl Carmen at the time, bullying.
Carl's come up several times in our podcast.
We're gonna have Carl as a guest.
That would be great if he'll call you back. But,
the infamous Carl. Yeah.
I think it might have been him on one occasion. One occasion I remember definitely I avoided getting in trouble with a bully. I think it was him, by going a different way to get home. So I came home late. So now you got a 6-year-old who's traveling. That's about a quarter-mile walk.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so on your own. And I didn't come home on time. And then I had to wait till your daddy comes home. So we had that thing with Mom. And then Dad comes home 5, 6 o'clock after school. And we sit down, I remember, in the bunk beds. And he sits down on the bed and with son, we need to talk. So there's where the lecture thing came in. But I knew it was at the end of that tail end thing, and that was a spanking. And those are the only 2 spankings I remember. But I remember on the one case I was pleading my innocence. Dad, the reason I was late, it had nothing to do with disobeying you. I was trying to avoid having my butt kicked by somebody. I didn't want it to happen. So now you're just going to do it on your own. Now, I don't think I ever said that to him. But in my mind, I was like, this is not fair. And then it happened again that spring, similar situation. I was late for some reason. I didn't think it was my fault, but those are 2 spankings. I never needed them again.
The huge irony the huge irony of that story is, how often was Dad ever on time?
That's true.
I can't tell you how many times I sat at practices or after school stuff waiting for hours and hours and hours. Like, then you hear from Mom later, oh, Dad forgot to pick you up. It's like, not like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Sometimes it was like an hour.
Or you walk home.
You had no cell phone, and you're like, what do I do? Do I wait? Do I walk? Is he going to get mad when I walk and he can't find me here?
I remember walking home from high school, walking home from the baseball field. You just did it
once from Notre Dame.
Because
Yeah,
after an
oh,
hour, you're
wow.
just like, I guess I better walk. Because mom was working, I think, or something about that point. Or
Yeah,
Yeah.
and with six
Yeah.
of us, I figured they probably forgot, but it was sort of
yeah,
the discouragement factor came in. Like, wow, how many
Yeah.
times this year has this happened to me that you really don't care that much? And there's no cell phones, there's no way to reach anybody. You can't go into
No.
the office at 4 o'clock when everything's shut down at the school.
Right.
And I
Right.
remember walking home. I got home just before the thunderstorm came through. So,
and we wonder why we all struggle feeling left out of
yeah,
things.
right.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember one spanking. I don't remember what I did,
Mhm.
but I just remember being at the end of the hall and he's like, "Yeah, I got to spank you." And I'm like, "No, no, no." And I just, quick smack and that was it. And I knew never, like you, Barry, I knew never to get to that point again. Never upset him that much. And he never, like I said, he didn't do it. It was just a matter of business. Like, you,
Yeah,
you got to get a spanking. Sorry,
yeah.
it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
He did
So
good
it
with
was, it
that.
was never a reactionary,
Wasn't
like, "Oh,
anger.
smack you."
No.
No, it was
Mm-mm.
always like, "This is part of the deal. You're being disciplined. You get a
And
spanking."
he talked it through. There
Yeah.
wasn't a mystery as to what was going to happen or why it was happening.
No.
And I appreciate. I tried to model that with my kids, and sure enough, we had to sit down. We're going to sit on my bed, and we're going to have a conversation, and this is how this is going to end. Can we just have 3 this time and not 4 spanks?
Uh, so looking back on dad and mom, what's your perspective on like their relationship? I guess more from dad because we're talking more about dad today, but because
I
obviously that impacted us, right? Because we're
Yeah.
all, and this is pretty, it's really in today's culture, the fact that we're all still married, right? That's phenomenal for 4 of us to be able to say that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, mom and dad had an impact on us somehow, right?
Yeah, I remember, for me, I think with dad especially, he was, like we just said, he's late to things. He was forgetful. He would always get. I remember him washing dishes after dinner and getting distracted by the TV, just standing there drying the same plate for like 20 minutes. And mom would get annoyed. She had that passive aggressive thing where she wouldn't say anything. She'd
He
be like,
did.
"Lar, Lar," you know. But all his flaws, and as much as he annoyed her sometimes, I never ever questioned his love for her.
Yeah.
He loved her so much, and I remember putting it in a journal back when I kept a journal. Um, when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer the first time, and just journaling about what an inspiration he's been to me in the way he's loved mom. And like we all here the day we get married, love your wife like Christ loved the church. And I don't think he could have been a better example of that. He loved
Mm.
her, and that was obvious. I mean, they weren't lovey dovey, but still at night when they sat down at 11:30 to watch TV together for 10 minutes before they fell asleep, he put his arm around her.
Yeah.
She would put her head on his shoulder, and he always put her first. That's how I always saw it. And so for me, that was a big, or I should say, it was a very high bar that I knew I'd have to try and match one day in my own marriage.
Mm.
And I remember thinking that even as a young, 20, 22 years old, I could see that in him.
What do you remember?
I would say the same. There was never a doubt in my mind that he loved her, and that manifested itself, but by what he didn't say. Whereas mom was much more quick to criticize.
Yeah, she was.
And yeah,
She was.
and I didn't care for that. And looking
Yeah.
back, I care less for it. But I don't remember him ever doing that. Where she might come over, like you were talking about, drying the same dish for 20 minutes. Shauna, she'd be more likely to come over to one of us and say, he's been drying the same dish for 20 minutes. I'm like, Mom,
Let him dry his dish.
just your husband. Like, what is? We'd never say that, obviously, but it's like,
Yeah.
come on. But
Yeah.
I would never hear that from him. Whereas I think he was a romantic on some level, and
Yeah.
I guess that goes with the art world. But looking back again, growing up, I remember the late night things, and they always mix a whiskey sour and sit down and have their little thing. Friday nights growing up for a long time was the one night that mom didn't always cook, and we would get pizza and they get Chinese food. I honestly, till I was an adult, I didn't know there was any other Chinese food except chicken chow mein.
I know. That's how I was too.
Me too.
I went to a restaurant, I was like, There's a menu here.
Yeah.
But that wasn't all the time, and that was a big deal for them because they couldn't, dinners out, that just didn't happen. They were so frugal
Yeah.
that way. And let's face it, for a long time she was home, and it was
Yeah.
just him working. So that summer theater became that extra paycheck, as much as she regretted or resented him for doing that. But I think where he was missing on the love part was, I don't know if he knew how to express it, because she well, obviously different love languages, but she wanted him not to be gone all the time. And had he been around a little bit more, she would have like, oh, okay, I'm more of a priority. Whereas he was so focused on what he was doing, and that perfectionism thing was so high, that he would pursue those things, not thinking that, oh, by the way, the fact that I'm coming home at 11 o'clock again isn't demonstrating the same kind of concern for my wife that I ought to. I just don't think he got that. So it was more of a ignorance or naivete on his part rather than anything else. But in his mind, there's no question. I'm a provider. I'm do everything I can for my family. I love my wife. That I didn't have any doubts about that kind of thing. And then when they did their 25th wedding anniversary, I don't know if you remember that at all.
Yeah, I actually do. Yeah.
There was a song that was playing at the time, and that became sort of their song for the 25th anniversary. They did a renewal of the vows, if I remember right.
Yeah, they did.
They wrote letters to one another as part of a retreat that they went away on, and they let me to see those. I have them now, actually.
Wow.
I think I still have them. I gotta dig them up. So in those things, you could see that they really did care about one another, even 25, 30 years into it.
Yeah, I remember them going away on that. It was a marriage encounter weekend, it was called.
Yeah.
And I remember coming back for that, and they were holding hands all the time and taking walks at night and stuff. It was cool to watch your parents go through that,
Well, if I remember right, Barry, I remember you saying something about hugs weren't that common until after the marriage encounter thing. Like, we hug each other, goodbye, hello, goodbye, every time we see each other. Every time I see you guys, and your kids, we always hug each other. But that wasn't necessarily the case early on. Is that right, Barry?
I don't.
I do remember it being. I remember something changing from that marriage encounter. I do.
See, I think it was more the theater. I think when Barry got involved in the theater himself in the acting part and started, that's when I noticed it. Again, 3 years younger perspective, but all his friends would come over, and mom and dad they were very hospitable people, considering they didn't have a lot of friends that came and hung out with them. Yeah. But they would open up the house to our friends. And our friends would call them mom and dad, and our friends would hug mom and dad. And I remember watching it with Barry and his friends, where like it was almost a little uncomfortable at first, but then I watched like slowly. It was like, I don't know, it's just like something happened, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're just a huggy family now, I guess.
So you saw that
that's what I remember. Mom and dad, it affected too, yeah. Because I still have friends today that say, mom and dad were mom and dad to them, and they would go up and hug them. That's just how they were, And so I think mom and dad just started responding to that. Yeah, because I don't remember a lot of hugs and stuff. Like, not that they ignored us or anything. I just don't remember a lot of it growing up as kids. But in the later years, yeah, you hug mom and dad,
That's interesting transition point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true. That's my perspective.
Well, the timetable, I would say, is definitely on target, because by the time I was done with high school and we were coming together for family events, hugs were normal greeting for all of us with mom and dad.
Yeah.
But I do remember vaguely changing with dad with a hug. I don't know if it was in college. I don't know. Maybe the first time I felt that he really wanted to give me a hug or something like that as a young adult. Mm-hmm. And it changed for me at that point then. But prior to that, I remember it wasn't part of our normal. That's not that. You know how you hug somebody, you do the pat,
yeah,
half a second. That was a little bit more what I remember. But at some point, there was a legitimate embrace rather than just the pat thing from dad. And I remember that somewhere probably by my early 20s. So that was a development that had changed.
But see, Dad's family, if I remember right, like the men in his family didn't hug. It was all handshake.
All shook hands.
So he didn't grow up with a hugging type thing. No. But I remember. Sorry, I remember very specifically, in church, we went to Catholic church, and he always did the sign of peace, peace be with you and whatever. And I remember him hugging me and kissing my head. And, even as a teenager, I'm like, Dad, stop kissing me. Like, that's weird. But And I always thought that was weird until you guys all had kids, and then I realized what, that kind of affection you feel
Yeah.
towards, somebody that is your family. But yeah, I remember that was being weird to me, But Dad was. I always remember him being affectionate. So if it wasn't earlier on, it definitely by the time I was around, I remember the hugs and kisses and stuff all the time.
Well, remember as like a, I don't know, probably 10ish going up into high, early teenage years. I remember, I mean, we always said goodnight to them. And I mean, as we got older, that's when they were, falling asleep on the couch and we would go say goodnight and kind of wake them up to say goodnight, I
Yeah.
think. But for some reason, I feel like I remember like kissing dad on the cheek or something, not like a whole lot of hugging.
Yeah. I remember that too.
And then the hugging did come later. You're right, because I think we all just started hugging all the time every time we saw each other. But I just kind of remember that. Like I would kiss mom goodnight, and then I feel like I gave him a kiss on the cheek, or he gave me a kiss on the head, or something. It wasn't really a hug, so it was interesting. But
Huh. So, what do you guys? Because we want to watch our time too for our listeners here. What are some of the things you walk away with, like how dad impacted you in life? For some of us as a father, how maybe his career even and his occupation like had an impact on you.
I'll jump in first.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think yeah. I mean, there's so many things, right?
Mhm.
So when I was born, dad was 47. Um, so that's like a world of difference for me. So that means, he's already pushing 60 when I'm 10. I played sports most of my life, and I never had that, like, he's going to go have a catch with me or we're going to shoot hoops together. Like, we never did any of that stuff. Always wished we did, but it just wasn't kind of what it was. I don't know that it was necessarily his age at the time, but I mean, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're looking at, he's what, 77 when I'm, or 30 years old. So he was definitely an older father for me. But I think that the biggest thing that always stands out to me is, one, his character. Again, loyalty to mom and to his family. I mean, he held his family to have very high standards. The faith that they instilled with us growing up in the church, and always making that a huge priority. They never let that slack ever. It wasn't like you had an option to skip Sunday church. Going through Catholic school, and just, they always had high priorities for their family, without a doubt. But I mean, I think the biggest thing was that with dad, that I feel like I learned, his work ethic. I mean, it was like
Mhm.
unparalleled. Like you said earlier, Barry, he did anything he had to do to take care of his family. I mean, he always had a second job. Teaching wasn't really a great, financial
Right.
profession to be in for six, kids, and a wife that was staying home with the kids. And then mom started going to work, I think, a little bit more when I went to school, because I remember her, being away doing night jobs and stuff. But I mean, he would do the summer schools, he would do the summer theaters, he would do evening classes, he would do, I don't know if he did art lessons or not. And then I know
A little
later
bit,
on
yeah.
he got into like the picture framing. It was like he was always trying to do something else to make extra money. And as much as I hated that he was always working, and I never really understood that, like, why is an art teacher always grading papers, grading artwork, after school, comes home at 6, and then gets right back at it till 11 o'clock at night? Never understood that. So, I mean, again, maybe he was more of a workaholic than he should have been. And I missed that he wasn't available more, but I think it really helped me figure out how to work hard. And he taught me how to work hard. And he never really taught me that. That was more just from his example. I don't ever remember having a conversation with him about, hey, you need to work hard. You need to do what you think is necessary, as you get older and you have a family. I never remember having those conversations with him. So it was definitely his work ethic that made a huge impact on me.
Mm. Yeah, that perfectionism was. Yeah, I mean, I definitely took it into into my life, and I mean that in a good way. I think there's so much to be said for that, about giving your best to something. I think I've learned to. I even call it "I'll pull a dad," where okay, the rooms. Well, a couple of things. One is it's okay. It's not the best, but it's the best I could do in this time, because I only have a certain amount of time to finish this room, whether it's painting or spackling, or it's good, right? And could I have done better? Yes, but I'm okay with it, right? Even though there's a side of me that sees that spot I miss spackling all the time and all that kind of stuff. Um, but I can walk away with that more of, yeah, it's good enough. And the second one, like finishing a project, like like I have to finish something because Dad was always the one. Like he was such a perfectionist. Like he would, I think he purposely left the trim off the room so he could go on to the next project because then it wasn't because then it wasn't if it wasn't finished, then it wouldn't have to be perfect. You know what I mean? So he sort of like let it sort. I don't know if he did that intentionally or not, but I'm in fact like, no, you know, I'm gonna finish this room, trim everything, it's done. I can walk away and say, okay, that room is finished. I can move on to the next one. May not always finish the room before I start the next 2 or 3 projects, but I will come back and make sure it's finished. Um, I think for me, I also learned just man, I think you know they did sacrifice. Mom and Dad sacrificed so much for us, and I didn't realize that until we started having kids of our own, where it's like you do whatever you have to try to provide the best you can, and even the best you can. I mean, looking back, I wish we could have given our kids so much more. I still do, you know. Um, but they did. They worked. You know, Dad worked 3 and 4 jobs so that we could have private education, right? Because he was scared for us to be in a public school because it was not the best environment. And he knew that being in the public school, he was like, I want you guys to be in a, I don't know if it was so much that they want us to be in Catholic school. They just want us not to be in a public school, you know? Um, so yeah, that was really big. And then his sacrifice of, like, I still remember like, yeah, so he missed a baseball game and all that kind of stuff. But you know, when I had a paper route, those papers were really, really heavy on a Sunday morning. And Dad would get up and take me around for those papers because he knew it would take like 16 trips on the bicycle. And honestly, like, I don't want to get up on us like now. Like, I would not want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's like your one day to sleep in, right? And then take your kid out for his paper route to make all of, you know, $13 for the week, you know. But he did it, you know. So yeah, he definitely sacrificed.
Sean?
Well, I mean, I would echo both of those, but I think two things. I guess one, again, that his dedication to his family, was obvious. He, like you guys said, he was devoted, and even if, like you were saying, Barrett, sometimes being devoted to being a father meant that he had to do his job, which meant he spent more time away from his family. Um, but again, as an adult, I appreciated that. As a kid, you don't, but as an adult, I appreciate that. So his dedication, and also, um, I think part of that, like we were talking about the dishes and other things, Dad was easily distracted.
Mm-hmm.
He's okay. I gotta cut the lawn, so he goes out to the shed, and the shed door's a little loose. So I gotta fix the shed door. So now I gotta go find, get the saw. And the saw blade's not right, so I gotta get a new saw blade. So he's like, 4 projects away from what he's supposed to be doing. So I think I learned. I've tried to not be that way. Um,
But the lawn
so
never got cut. So that was a good thing.
what's that?
The lawn never got cut because Dad never came back to the lawnmower. So.
No. That's why he had one of us. But yeah, I mean that those types of things, like he was so good with his love and his devotion, and but there, like you said, there's things that he did that maybe didn't benefit the family. So I try to learn from that, I guess is what I'm saying. And so I try to be more focused and try to, when start a job, work on it and not get distracted by something else. So some of those things. But yeah, I think it comes down to, he loved Mom, and he was a devoted father and husband, and it's inspiration to me. That's the biggest impact, for me. I want to be able to do that the way he did. How about you, Bear?
Yeah, what are you
I
thinking?
mentioned it once before when we were all together in this forum. Uh, but there were one was a surprise thing that he gave, and I always appreciate him for it because he was more focused on tasks and stuff. He wasn't the one you go talk to. You go talk to Mom. You got a girlfriend problem, you go talk to Mom. Mom was a very good listener and very supportive, and she was the one that took care of us when we had chicken pox and the flu and all that other stuff. And Dad wasn't necessarily, but I remember him bringing a gift or so sometimes when we laid out on the couch. But in high school, I went on a retreat, and I had the best I could. Thank God I got saved, but it was a mystical experience, the best of my knowledge. And I got all, you're in high school, your emotions are all over the place. And I'm like, I think I saw Jesus in the candle. Oh, my goodness. really? And he was talking to me, and I go, oh boy. So I'm like 17 years old. I'm sucking this whole thing in, absorbing it all. And I told somebody at the retreat, and they're like, well, that's nice, Barry. That's nice. And I think, yeah, but this is important to me. This is really important to me. This is like part of my faith journey. And like when I got home, Dad asked her how to go, and I shared that with him. And he didn't blow it off at all. He engaged me in the conversation about it, and he encouraged
Wow.
me. And he encouraged me about, faith is very, very important. And if you think something happened between you and the Lord on that occasion, he didn't
Wow.
basically say I'm all for it, but there was no question that he wasn't going to say, that's weird, Barry, get over the emotions of a 17-year-old. There was nothing even close to that. I was like, whoa,
Wow.
I would have expected that from mom. So that was a real nice gift. And so I appreciated that for him. There was a depth to him that every once in a while you got to see, because you would sit down and be able to pull it out, because he wouldn't necessarily
Mm.
volunteer those things. But the thing that is it would be part of his work ethic for sure, but more specifically the pursuit of excellence. And that he was, and Sue and I talk about this now, my wife, about being like Dad or whatever, and she doesn't see it. She thankfully is much more supportive of me, and she doesn't see Dad, from what I've described of Dad, in the projects I do either, because she's like, no, this is getting done and it's not hanging. But I do appreciate Dad in that area, because I thought, well, maybe like me, um, I'm 90% done with the job. I'm bored now. I want something new. So I go on to the next thing without
Okay.
finishing the first one. So I appreciate that possibility for maybe Dad.
Okay. Maybe that was why.
But the pursuit of excellence, that the paint
Yeah.
stuff, to this day,
You wash out your brush thoroughly.
Yeah.
more so, I actually used it as an illustration once. I picked up a special brush to clean brushes, so that I don't do what Dad did and just pound it at the bottom of the sink until it all comes out. I take the brush and I
Oh,
stroke this thing out to make sure this
I
brush
do
is
too.
really. And so I'm not being facetious. I don't paint a room or wash a brush without thinking about them.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how much it's there. And I find myself wanting to have the piece that he was shooting for, which was the excellence, but not getting bogged down with the perfectionism, which prevents me from finishing a job,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's part of a work ethic too.
Yeah.
Be faithful to complete it, and so I'm trying to find the balance between those things. But the pursuit of excellence, which I found later in life, is actually a very core Christian concept. I didn't know it at the time, but makes me appreciate it even more so. So I would say that was probably the one thing that I walk away with more than anything.
And it's
Yeah. I still love.
oh, go ahead.
Good. I was just say I love to paint. Not because I need more work or I enjoy that part. Just the smell of the paint just reminds me of Dad, and it just brings back so many memories. I mean, I remember just the smell walking backstage, and you would just smell the paints and it just conjures up so much emotions. And yeah, it's a Dad thing, and yeah. So today I still clean out my brush, but my paintbrush to paint a room will last me 15 years. And people, they'll do 2 bedrooms or something. They're done with it because that thing's like so far gone, and that all comes from Dad. So, Brian, what are you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, it's timely. I don't know that we really intended to do it this time of year, but the anniversary of his passing is right
Friday.
here. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a while now, and I think it was, yeah. How many years now we got?
8 years.
8 years, yeah,
it's
and
been 8 years. Wow.
yeah, it's funny because when you asked like kind of what you remember, Dad, I I specifically remember the day he passed. I was driving home from the nursing home after seeing him after he passed, and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to process it all. And I mean, he had Alzheimer's for many years. He really didn't know any of us for the last 5 years. So
Yeah,
that was hard. It was hard for all of us. We visited him, but we knew he wasn't there, and so our relationship was pretty much had gone away years before that. But now it was like real, and I just remember the only thing I could do to process all that was to I put on my audio notes on my phone, and I just started talking, like writing a letter to him. And
Oh,
it was like
wow.
kind of the only way I could really get the things off my heart that I wanted to say. And it was amazing, like the emotions that came out of that. Again, remembering him and who he was. And, we all have our faults, none of us are perfect, but, he was a good dad to us.
Do
So
you
as
still
we,
have that audio?
I put actually I wrote out the letter. Yeah. So I actually have the letter. I actually gave it to mom, not long
Wow.
after. Yeah. So she had seen it. So
That's
That's
good.
great.
yeah.
We had
All
talked
right.
another time about coming back and talking about what it was like dealing
Yeah.
with dad's like last years and struggling through that as kids, and watch your dad struggle through Alzheimer's. So we'll have to come back around to that at another day. So
And I think even just, having both parents gone, there's not many of your friends, I think, that have both parents that have passed. And it's interesting a lot. And I think, it's an interesting thing to talk about because, not many of our friends that I know have even lost one parent, let alone both of them at this point. So,
mhm.
but I guess we want to wrap this up, right, Ken?
Yeah, so why don't we this is take a mulligan, so why don't we talk about some things that you think dad would have taken a mulligan if he could have? Or some things that maybe he even suggested. It was definitely not golf because dad was not a golfer. Because we all experienced that, taking him out one day. Not too long before he went into into the nursing home, right? I mean, it wasn't that
Yeah.
much longer after that, I think. But we tried to take him golfing, and we realized probably after the third hole, like, okay, we're not here to play golf. We're just here to entertain dad for a while. But what are some of the things you think dad might have taken a mulligan on if he could have? Okay, what comes to my mind is, and he talked about it. And I remember we used to go to the doctor, our pediatrician growing up as kids was across the river because we were in Jersey, was across the river in Yardley, which was like a long drive, even though it was like all 20 minutes maybe. But you were over the river. So, but we used to, going through Yardley, we would pass this house on the corner. And it was a nicer house than the ones we were living in. And it had a lot more property. And it had a stream in the backyard because you would cross over the little bridge as you're on that road. And I remember mom and dad talking, and they might have only said it once, and then I probably kept bringing it up as a kid. That would have been so cool. Dad had looked at a job opportunity in that school district, and I think it was early on. I think it was within probably the first 10 years of teaching, maybe even the first 5. And he was debating and debating, did he want to start over in a new school district? But they had actually looked at that home to possibly purchase that home and then take the job there. And so how much life would have been different
Wow.
for us growing up in
Yardley.
Yardley, PA, right?
I didn't know
So,
that. I didn't
No,
know
I
so
didn't
that.
I
know
think
that either.
so I think that was a mulligan dad thought he wish he could have taken, and he didn't. So
Well, I think probably the one I thought I remember you, Ken, talking about he always had aspirations to have done something different. I think at the end of the day, or maybe it was you, Sean. I think at the end of the day, I don't know that he just wanted to be an art teacher. I think he just had so much potential and so much gift. I think if anything, I think he probably would have wanted to be more of an artist, actually producing the work and maybe selling it. I mean, he's definitely an artist at heart naturally and has that artistic mindset. And I think he probably would have wanted to do something more than just teach. He was a very gifted teacher, but I still think he would have wanted to do something a little bit more. And I think he always probably wanted to make more money as an individual and be a little bit more successful than a high school salary that he was making at that time. So I think he might have wanted to go a different direction with his artwork itself.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that before, Brian. I don't disagree. I think he would have liked to do more art. I think he lacked the confidence though.
Hmm,
yeah,
I think
definitely.
I mean he always, not that he ever seemed unsure about things, but I don't think he had the confidence in himself. Maybe because he had an older brother that kind of outshined him. I think even their
Hmm.
own family. So he probably never felt like he was the center of attention or anything. So he didn't have a whole lot of confidence. But yeah, I think he would have liked to do more with his art. I mean, he did. He didn't do much, until he was retired. Really, I mean, we didn't watch him. He didn't do a lot of paintings on his. I mean, he did some when he was younger, but I remember him painting on vacation after he retired.
Yeah.
That was something he didn't do when we were younger. At least I don't remember it. Um, But I think he would have liked to do more with that had he had the opportunity. But they got married and had a kid within the first year, so it's kind of everything else went a different way. And I think he was happy with his life. I think he was very content. But I think that's something he might, if he had opportunities, I think he would have done more with that.
Well, I'm cheating a little bit because he actually told me at one point. It was actually it was the retreat. I'm almost positive same retreat. Well, the last night that we were all there as individuals, they told us that we were supposed to separate and go into any place in this. It was sort of like a convent or a monastery. So there's plenty of holes that you can hide in. Go there. We're going to give you something. You're going to go there and you're just going to spend the next hour or whatever. And like, what is this? And for the 40 or 50 of us that were on this retreat, what they had done was coordinate with our parents and asked each parent to write a letter to their high school senior, sort of reflecting on them growing up and their life and their wishes for them now that they're moving into adulthood. And I found my place, sat down, I pulled open, I recognized Mom's handwriting right away. Like, this is nice. Man, I wish Dad would have written one. Because Mom always wrote the notes, or she that's just who. And Dad doesn't communicate like that. And once I got through Mom's, there was a second envelope, and Dad's was in there.
Wow.
And I'll have to pull that out and let you guys read it sometime. But in there, he did say his regrets. Basically, in very simple form. It wasn't anything super outrageous, but he did regret that even at that point. This is what 1979. Not spending more time with us, and he wished that his jobs didn't take him to places that they did, because he would have wanted more of that. And he in light of that, needing to go to X, Y, or Z because of the demands of the job, he apologized for going too fast in the car sometimes on the road. And I guess I remember a little bit of that, but I don't remember him being a speed racer or anything like that. So there were a couple of things like that were just short and sweet, but to the point. And so I know he was aware of the fact that his jobs took him away from the time he wanted to be with us.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Good stuff.
That is really good stuff.
Yeah.
So your final comments before we wrap it all up, guys?
We all have different kind of fathers, I think, and I think we need to just understand and appreciate who we have in our lives that either are that father or that father figure, and just hold that close.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, why don't we just encourage you all who are listening that we need to take mulligans, and maybe before it's too late to try it again, give it another swing, look at life a little differently, and try it again before time runs out, because it does run out pretty quick. So it was great having you guys all on, and thanks for listening today, and we'll catch up with you guys next episode.
We know everyone can use a second chance or a do-over, so take a mulligan and try again. Thanks so much for joining with us today. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Like, click, and subscribe.